You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. And now your footwear insiders, Matt Priest and Andy Polk.
Welcome to the minds of Priest and Polk today on this episode. We'll call it Polk and Priest pontification. Sometimes it's not about finding the solution. Sometimes it's about thinking about the problems and challenges to find better solutions or think about things in a different way. We really try to do that on this show. We do try to find solutions and give options to people to plug in real time, but we also try to be really thoughtful about changes and events occurring and how to think about them more clearly and make better decisions, I think. And I think that's the power of the Shoe In Show and really what we're trying to accomplish, Matt.
Yeah, I think you're right, Andy. And so there's so much coming at us right now. And we often talk about how our Tuesday weekly calls are, if anything, therapeutic, right? Because so many people are dealing with challenges. And we say this over and over again, but it's once in a generation challenge, like 4 or 5 once in a generation challenges that our industry is facing. And they're doing it with resiliency. But the challenge is for all of us that not everything is within our control, right? And I think that's where the inflationary thing comes in as we talk about inflation, its impact on supply chain. And it seems with the U.S. government, just about nothing is in their control anymore either. Yeah. So the whole thing is super painful. And I don't want to be a Debbie Downer because there are some really bright spots in the economy. We're not talking about the Great Recession of 2008 or anything like that, but there are some challenges, and inflation is something we haven't seen since you and I were just little toddlers running around.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it is concerning to look at the inflation because I think it's, to your point, obviously last year we heard a lot about like transitory inflation. Everybody who was importing product knew that it wasn't transitory. Mm-hmm. They just ask. Mm-hmm. People would tell them based on the cost and the scarcity and just marketplace dynamics, obviously, right? So I think we're now on what I would call it, and maybe it's not exactly scientific or from an economist, the right nomenclature, but I think it's structural inflation, meaning that for so long we had deflation. Right now we're seeing inflation. And in the future, prices may dip on like shipping, but it's not going to necessarily dip on materials. It may not dip on factory wages. It may not dip on retail wages. It's something we're going to have to factor in, and hopefully the consumer is, just like companies are having to socialize themselves to these cost increases, the consumer will adapt to the price increases as well. I think the challenge is wages were increasing substantially and purchasing power was increasing on one end because there was a lot of stimulus money, the other end because the wages were going up because of labor scarcity. That seems to have shifted because inflation's jacked up so much faster than even the wage inflation. And I think we look at the job numbers and we see this great, the great resignation or like jobs not being filled wasn't quite accurate. We, after a couple of months, they fill in the numbers and have better data. And we look and see there's been pretty big job increase numbers. So, I just think we've got to prepare ourselves for the fact that we'll be able to find some cost reductions here or there in the future. But for a lot of things, once the price increases, it's hard to decrease it, right? And I also think that, we could segment it too, right? So big box retailers are that's the toughest squeeze, right, on your margin because they're like price point specific. And if you can't move it up, you're going to get hit. And it's a lot different than a Nike or an Adidas selling direct to consumer and what they can do with their business. So I don't know, Matt, it's troubling, but to your point, it is what it is. It's something we have to adapt to, and we can complain a lot about it, but there's simply not a lot of the one option that we do have is the policy option is the 301, right? We've been yelling about that nonstop.
I know, yeah, like roll back the duties yesterday, President Biden, and it would help in a lot of ways. But Andy, one of the things that's been frustrating for me, and we talked about it privately, is that the numbers, the forecasters, the numbers, they're not always right? Or those analyzing those numbers don't always get the analysis right. And Axios, one of our favorite publications, had a mea culpa from Matt Phillips who's one of the writers there. And the title of the article just yesterday was "Mea culpa, I got inflation wrong." And the fact that in the article, he outlines a variety of different reasons why he got it wrong, because he was reading the bond yield market and it had a certain percentage, and that typically has a tie-in to, 2% inflation or less. So it's not a big deal. And all the Pollyannas have been talking about the skies falling for so long on inflation. And so they've been wrong for so long, and none of us saw this coming. I'm reading this thinking, maybe the anecdotal, maybe where the rubber hits the road, maybe where companies are in the trenches doing business and selling product consumers need, like footwear, seeing these things pretty up close and personal, knowing that in August last year, we were at a dinner, in August of 2020, we're at a dinner with some footwear execs saying, come January 1, there's no more holding back the price increases across the board. And we knew this was coming. Everyone knew it, but the economists at Axios didn't know it. And so I'm kind of blown away. And it just reiterates your point you've made a couple of times. We've talked about this, that how could people get it so wrong? How could people analyze the data and not see it? It's because they're not in the trenches. They're not selling product to people who buy it, and they have to make payroll and cover margins and pay for the materials and ship the materials and get them across the border and sell them to people. I don't know how people didn't see this coming.
Well, I think the problem is we're in a completely different epoch, in a completely different economic era. We haven't experienced anything like this ever, and they're still using old data sources or old models to try to figure out and forecast what's happening. And they get it wrong. And not only do they oftentimes get it wrong, but it's painted weirdly, because, like, let's say economists forecast job gains of 1.5 million jobs, right? Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden the article is job miss, only 1.1 million jobs created. Like a million jobs created, that's really good news. But they paint it as a negative because it was not meeting the expectation. Who are these people that are setting the expectation? We talk a lot about privacy, and it's like, who are the watchers, or who are the people saying something misleading? Right? It's the same thing, but we let these guys get away with it. And I think more than ever, executives are having to change their information sources and broaden them out to balance and better forecast what's happening and look at more data sets. And thank goodness even the U.S. government now is starting to look at their data sets and say, what are we missing? We're having calls with them about updating that. But they can't account for certain sale channels like e-commerce stuff or things like. So there's all these new things that are happening in new technologies, and the biggest thing for me right now in 2022 is it's not the rate hikes that are coming that's going to be a problem. It's going to be the continued price of oil that's going to be over $100 a barrel. And it's something that, from a policy perspective, you can't do much about, because the OPEC isn't willing to pump more. And then where you would find relief in the U.S. on the shale production, the major companies are not increasing their production because they got bit in the ass a couple of years ago, and they started to increase in great numbers, and the oil price dropped, and they lost their hat. So in order to provide value to investors, they're basically saying we're not going to increase production above the same structured line.
Cracker.
Well, we don't care. They're like, we don't care if it goes to $120 a barrel. We're not increasing it because we need to have the return and reduce our risk. So, and then you got refinery issues, then you got green energy issues. So the solution in DC is we'll reduce the tax. Okay. Or the coming thing too, Matt, and we talked a little bit about this, is I hope the debate doesn't turn to price controls. But when you don't know what you're doing or you don't have options, you start to bring up old ideas that can have great consequences.
Right.
But I think and I think that's where we're headed, is if we're talking about, if Democrats are saying let's have no gas tax, which helps fund green energy, they're eventually going to go to price controls, and that's a scary proposition in terms of how that's going to impact the marketplace.
It's so gimmicky, man. And when you're talking about the position that the oil producers here in the U.S. and elsewhere are kind of, I got to get mine right now, right? It's the same argument we're hearing on the carrier side, right? So the carriers are like, usually we're in this deflationary environment where spot rates are lower than our contract rates, and we're having to adhere to those spot rates, and we're we get our hat handed to us, and it's a costly business, and we can't build in more capacity because it's expensive. And then if demand drops out, we're stuck with all these boats, and screw all that, man. We're going to get as much as we can while we can. And so I mean, the things they're doing to some of our members that basically like some of the terminal operators who are also owned by the carriers, like, hey, come get your boat or come get your container. If you don't get it, you're going to have to pay us more. And so, our company drives up and says, all right, ready to get our container? No, you can't get access to it right now, but we're still going to charge you, even though we won't give you access. And it's just like this. You got to be kidding me. They're trying to squeeze every drop out. You throw on that oil prices going up. Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's going to be exacerbated. It's crazy just thinking about how it'll exacerbate the price. The rates being 20,000 a container. Those will come down somewhat off their highs. They'll settle maybe around 10,000 a container based on experts that we partner with, Andy. But you can easily see the oil pushing that back up. And what do you do then? I mean, it's continued inflationary pressure.
Yep. And then you see trucking to the warehouse and out of the warehouse go up. You see like last mile delivery costs go up.
Woe is us.
You see the input costs go up because petroleum's using a lot of plastic and rubber that we use in footwear. We're trying to change that, obviously, and people are trying to diversify into more biomaterial, but still, it's there. And I guess the other kind of concern that I see that people need to be aware of, and maybe we'll see it more in DC than other people, but the trucker grievances that are occurring. Mm-hmm. So what happened with Canada is not going to be isolated. It's going to spread. The difference between the Canadian issue about the lockdowns and the mandates, the difference here is, and I've been listening and watching and reading because there's apparently a convoy coming to DC by the time this is produced and broadcast. Yeah. Perhaps it already happened and went through, but they're trying to shut down 495, which is the major beltway around DC, to cause pain of people in the area to speak out more, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the social protest movements that we've seen create friction for local communities to say no more and have an impact on the politics. But their grievances are around gas prices. Mm-hmm. Their grievances around parts for their trucks. Their grievances that they're paying $30,000 more for a new truck or a used truck than they were 6 months ago. Mm-hmm. So they have these legitimate inflation grievances, and they're also trying to remind people we're the ones who deliver your product to keep your shelves stacked.
Right.
And no one's looking out for us. And that's going to be a concern if that spread, if, we're looking at, and this is the other thing too, and you can speak to this more than I can, but West Coast port contract negotiations are coming up in the summer.
Yep.
The truckers could strike as well.
Right.
There's no certainty that this won't spread and become a bigger issue. And then that means actual product shortages in stores and things like that. And maybe it's hyperbole or whatever, but from the stuff I've been seeing, these guys are fed up. And and I think we see it too at retail. Retail workers are fed up. They're burnt out. Just a lot of social movements happening. But, again, that port contract negotiations, we hope will go well, but it seems like there's a lot of leverage from the longshoremen at this point.
There's a ton of leverage, Andy. You put it really well, because if you think about it, there's this moment in time where everyone in the United States, even my grandma, may she rest in peace, knows what's going on at the ports and knows about supply chain issues. When the person walks up to you at church, it slaps you on the back and says, "Hey, buddy, how about that supply chain?" Like everyone's aware of it. And so the longshoremen know this. They are concerned about automation, which is in the minds of many the future of not having what we've been dealing with recently as it relates to the movement of goods through our ports, creating more automation. And you and I have been to a fully automated terminal at the Port of Long Beach, which is an amazing thing to see. It's super amazing. But they're concerned about it, clearly. And now they have a labor-friendly occupant in the White House who has a long history of partnering with labor unions and the like, and just as the base of the historic Democratic Party. And so all those things come together, which June 30 is the end of the current contract. And the contract will probably expire, and they will probably operate without a contract as they negotiate. But our members are putting stuff on the boats now based on current history, or most recent history, is going to take a while, and that stuff's going to get to us around the time the contract expires. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. A lot of our members are front loading and pushing much product in right now as they more so than they normally would to get beyond or get ahead of that. But it's just a big concern of ours. So we have a number of letters going in, both with other associations and personally to the FMC, the White House, to make sure the president and all those who have power to see this coming start putting pressure on both sides to figure this out sooner rather than later, because it's an election year. And I think politically the White House would be really it would be really beneficial if they would take a step to try to ease this concern. If you're heading into back to school and product is held up or there's a port strike or slowdown, that is not going to be good optically or politically for the White House, and particularly in a midterm election that the occupant of the White House usually gets shellacked, which is what the polling is showing right now. So there's a lot to consider. I will say, last thing I'll say, Andy, is that the silver lining in this dark cloud is that FDRA's commodities report and many of our reports, you and others and Gary and others behind the scenes have been working to make the even more efficient reads, more quick hits as to what's happening, more what the trend lines are, take some of the fluff out. And so if you're an FDRA member and you're tracking these commodity prices that we've been talking about, you're doing so in a cleaner and more succinct way. And so we hope that you appreciate that. If there are other things we should be tracking, you can always let us know at info@fdra.org.
Yeah, and I should remind people, major companies use our commodity report to negotiate future rates with suppliers. So for some reason, cotton decreases on our commodity report as a trend line because we look at indexes overall, then your prices should be decreasing. And if they're not, you can take it to your supplier and use that as a tool to better negotiate. So a good solution there. I am concerned too, like, first of all, on the politics side, like I always have like rules of politics. One big rule of politics is don't mess with the kids. Mm-hmm. We saw it here in Virginia where Matt and I both live. The governor's race boiled down to parent involvement in schools, and this real grievance or perceived grievance doesn't matter. But there was this idea that the parents weren't that much welcome in the decision making in schools. We also see it in San Francisco where some of these folks just got kicked out for, instead of getting, kids properly educated, they were focused on changing school names. So don't mess with kids. You want to see violence in politics? Go to any school board meeting in the country, and your ears will be ringing from the anger and vitriol from families right now about schools and their inadequate leadership in these strange times. Anyway, so back to school, one of our biggest seasons. But I would say too, Matt, don't forget, and you're going to be like, that's unbelievable, but we're 7 months from the holiday season.
Oh no,
we're 7 months from the holiday season. So my idea is like that import over the summer is not just going to be for back to school. People are going to be trying to get in holiday product to their warehouse if they can, so that they don't have shortages, or they're front loading the cost, because my guess is they're seeing that this inflation is going to go to 2023, and it may only get worse, right? So might as well go ahead and put in the demand now and start to churn it out and see what you can get in, even if you can get 20% of your product in for holiday and have it sit somewhere. So that's the challenge too, is it's not like the congestion, I think, will be really bad around the same time that we have these port discussions.
Andy, we're getting experts telling us it's first quarter 24 is when the port will get back to normal.
Woo! There is no new normal. This is it, folks.
I know. I'll be 50 years old by the time this thing is.
Buckle up. You could be like me and drive a 2008 Honda Accord and save yourself the extra car payment every month and be able to deal with these prices. But not everybody's like me. I mean,
that might be a $50,000 used car at this point. You never know.
It could be, honestly, but I'm not selling. So, I need a dinged up car to drive into the city every day. I've already gotten into, the last 12 months, I've already gotten into a traffic accident. So, I'm happy to have a car that doesn't have all these bells and whistles, and Vladimir Putin can't hack into electronically like the Teslas and put my brakes on. The silver stallion continues its reign. I saw the best joke I saw about Honda Accord was like, in the last couple of months, I saw a meme where it was like, COVID's lasting longer than a Honda Accord. And I was like, oh yeah, keep going.
Funny.
I will say this, and we can do the parting slot. There are solutions, right? The commodity report is a solution. A big solution is just staying involved on our Tuesday calls to hear what the experts are saying so you better plan ahead. Like sometimes the solution is not a cost reduction. It's just planning ahead to make sure that you're communicating to your customers and to your teams what will occur so that all of a sudden it doesn't pop up on their radar and they get pissed. That's a big solution, just over communicating. And I'll say the other day, we had a member who was like, hey, we need to communicate with our customers while our prices are going up. Can you send me a list of commodity costs, supply chain costs, spot rates, whatever that comes from FDRA that shows the real data and what our impact is so they understand this isn't just coming from us, this is impacting everybody. And for any member out there who wants that, contact us. We're happy to do that. Yep. It's factual data. We're not flushing, it's real numbers. And if that helps you out, to paint that picture of what's really happening. So happy to do that.
I'm shocked someone has to paint that picture, but it's definitely.
If it helps, it helps.
Yep.
Last thing as we wrap up, I saw a quote from the CEO. No, this is a legit quote. Although the Honda Accords last forever too. I mean, I've only got 60,000 miles on my car. This thing's I'm gonna give it to my kids, right? They're gonna hate me more than they already hate me. Anyway, there was a quote from the CEO of Microsoft last December, and they were reporting earnings, and people are like, why is Microsoft going so gangbusters? And yeah, it's the cloud and all that. But he pointed out, he goes, our products are deflationary products in an inflationary environment, meaning that the cost hasn't increased that much, and the ROI you get from using technology correctly will decrease your labor hour costs. It'll increase. So I think that's the thing is we're paying a lot for product. We're paying a lot for physical movement. We're paying more for warehouses and trucks. We're paying more for wages. The solution is in the technologies that are out there. And if, please don't think that you can buy one thing and it solves all your problems. You need to be thoughtful about finding the right solutions for the right kind of trouble spots, making sure they're user friendly. So it doesn't take a lot of time. It should be plug and play, right? That's the low hanging fruit is what can I use right now that will help me? So some of those things are like material exchange. Some of those things are syndicate we work with. Some of those things are First Insight. We have a lot of those folks on our show. We have a lot of folks on our weekly calls that are specific to helping you, better source, better demand plan, better make sure your products are up on the websites correctly, automating things that you don't have to hire people for, which you probably can't. No one wants to do data entry anymore. I hate to tell you, no one. So real challenges, but there are solutions. Keep working at it. We know everybody out there is doing the Lord's work right now, and we're cheerleading for you and trying to bring people together to find better ways forward, as always. So, folks, with that, Godspeed. We'll keep you updated. Tuesday calls. Every Tuesday, 2 p.m. Eastern time, we do a membership call. Join us. Contact us if we can help you. We're here to help and serve. And with that, I will say Shoe-In is out.
Shoe-In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.